pleased to welcome back home our distinguished alumni for this year. Michael Froman is currently Deputy Assistant to President Barack Obama and Deputy National Security Advisor for the International Economic Affairs, a position held jointly at the National Security Council and the National Economic Council at the White House. His responsibilities include international trade and finance, energy security, and climate change, development and democracy policy for the United States government. He also serves as a Sherpa for the G8, G20, and APEC summits. He is government co-chair of the U.S.-India CEO Forum, the U.S.-Brazil CEO Forum, and the Transatlantic Economic Council, and chairman of the Major Economies Forum on Energy and Climate. Prior to assuming his position at the White House, he worked at Citigroup, where he launched international infrastructure business, and served as Chief Operating Officer for Citi Alternative Investments, President and Chief Executive Officer of Citi Insurance, and Head of Emerging Market Strategies. He was a fellow at the Council of Foreign Relations. From 1997 to 99, Michael served as Chief of Staff and Department of Treasury at the Department of Treasury, and he was previously Treasury Deputy Assistant Secretary for Eurasia and the Middle East. His responsibilities included the United States economic policy towards the former Soviet Union and Central and Eastern Europe, as well as implementation of economic components for the Dayton Accords. He is a graduate of Branson, of course. He went to some other places that you might have heard of, Princeton University and Harvard Law School and Oxford. He joins us with his son. His son Ben is with us, and we're delighted to welcome you, and we're particularly delighted to welcome you home, Michael. Thank you for being here.
Thanks very much, Woody. And it's an honor to be here for any number of reasons, but I'm told that I'm the first man to receive the Alumni Award, and I'm delighted to be able to shatter this glass ceiling, come over the Branson School for so long, and strike a note for gender equality. So, I was looking back at the list of past winners, and I remember fondly Kim Belshé, who was a couple years ahead of me here, who I admired greatly then, and who obviously went on to do great things for the state of California and for healthcare generally, and of course Julia Child, who not only made a great souffle, but was a terrific spy for the United States, and so I feel honored to be in their presence. I wanted to thank a few people who are here. First of all, my parents who are here, without whom whatever I do could not have been possible, and I'm grateful for all their support. And my son, that's what he said, Benjamin, who was reluctant to leave a day of school to come out with me early. I asked his advice about what I should talk about and what people in his assembly would want to hear, and his only advice was not to be too boring. Now, you have to put this in context. Ben was at my office the other day, and one of my colleagues asked him whether he wanted to work at the White House when he grew up. And he thought for a moment. He said, "No, I want to work someplace interesting." I think there's very little chance I'm going to meet Ben's standard in these remarks. Sorry, Ben. I'm delighted that so many friends have come and fellow alumni. Of course, they've been exiled to the other theater, but for Jason and Emily and Kristen and Lawson and several others from my class and around the class, I'm honored that you've come, and some of you have traveled to be here, and that warms my heart. I have a lot of good memories from being here and a lot of good friendships that have lasted over the years. You know, I noticed, and I was told that Brenda Brown and Marty Talent have continued to have a relationship here, and of course Mr. Richardson, who I was always scared stiff of when I was here, but delighted to see him here where he can't discipline me. But it's a pleasure to see them, to know that they're still here, and to know that buildings have been named after them, just to recognize their immense contribution to the school. I wanted to say one word about teachers, because when I think about, and Liz Gill, who works here and who I asked what I should talk about, she said you'd be interested in knowing sort of how I got to where I am. But when I think about one of the major factors of how I got to where I am, it's been because I've had the pleasure of having a series of mentors over the years. At Princeton, I was Professor Dick Ullman, at Oxford, it was Sir Michael Howard. At Harvard Law School, it was Abe Shays. These were leaders in their field, giants in their field. But most importantly, giants in terms of the generosity that they showed towards me and many other students in being mentors and helping them along. And I know that starts in places like this and the teachers who were here and how important that is. So I hope you take advantage of that. I hope you thank the mentors in your life because it really is a critical issue. But when I think about why I am where I am, I have to say it is by virtue of in many respects, nothing more than dumb luck. Being in the right place at the right time and having the skills to take advantage of those situations. I first entered government in 1992 on what was supposed to be a one-year, nonpartisan fellowship, something called the White House Fellowship. And I was a Democrat working in the last few months of the Bush administration, Bush 41. I started in September. And come the election in November, of course, the Republicans lost. And come January 20th, all of my Republican colleagues left the White House and basically left the White House to me and a bunch of janitors. And the Clinton administration arrived. And I wasn't sure exactly how that would affect my job. But I kept on doing what I had been doing before, which was working on trade policy, writing memos. And I would write 2 or 3 memos a day to the people who I thought might be my new bosses, telling them what was going on and what I was doing. One day, a gentleman shows up at my door, and it's a guy named Bob Rubin, who ultimately became Secretary of the Treasury. And he said, you know, I don't know who you are. I don't know why you're sending me memos. I didn't hire you. But the memos are pretty good. Keep them coming, and we'll figure out what to do with you later. And that became the beginning of a very important relationship to me. I became his chief of staff at the Treasury Department. I went with him into the private sector. And again, he served as a very important professional mentor. But it really was the luck of being there at the right time, in the right place, and having the skills and the attitude to take advantage of that. I guess perhaps the luckiest acquaintance I made was at Harvard Law School, where I joined the Law Review, and there was, by his own terms, a skinny black kid with a funny name, and he became president of the Harvard Law Review, and we worked together there for 2 years. And we would sit around late at night at Law Review, Barack Obama and several of us, talking about the first Gulf War, talking about the articles we were editing for the Journal, and many of them were about discrimination at the time, and talking about what was going on in law schools generally. And that was a time, for those of you whose parents are lawyers or who may know this, where there was a lot of division at law schools. A lot of conservative versus liberal. There was the rise of the Federalist Society in law schools. And law schools were a place of a lot of conflict. And Barack Obama excelled at the Law Review and became president of the Law Review precisely because he was able to bring people together and act pragmatically and make sure everyone felt heard in whatever the final result was. And those are the same skills that he has used when he ran for president, when he ran for Senate, when he ran for president, and in the way that he governs the country. And the challenges obviously facing the country now are a little bit more consequential than the challenges facing Harvard Law Review in 1990, 1991. But he has brought the same attitude of being able to bring people together and try and create pragmatic solutions to move forward throughout. And that's why when he asked me to join his administration, I was privileged to take him up on the offer. And I'll say, and this will sound, I think, somewhat corny, but it is true, that all of us at the White House, and all of us through the administration, we wake up every morning coming to work thinking there are 308 million Americans who are entrusting us with the welfare of the country. And frankly, it's bigger than that, because the U.S. isn't just any country. It's a country that the rest of the world looks to for leadership. And we come in every day thinking about, are we doing the right thing for those 308 million Americans and for the rest of the world? And are we keeping faith with them? You know, it's been a hell of a couple of years, frankly. We've had the financial crisis, the worst economic crisis in 80 years. And I think the president and his team have done, frankly, a remarkable job. People forget in January, February, 2 years ago, of 2009, the situation that the global economy was in, and how we were on the edge of what could have been the next Great Depression. But through quick action domestically and internationally, we got the financial system back on track. We got the economy back on track. And 2 years later, of course, we still have much more work to be done, much more work to put people back to work. But we're no longer on the edge of a crisis. And that was through action and leadership. Secondly, again, people forget what the position of the United States was in the world in 2007, 2008. And I think it's not too much of an exaggeration to say that that President Obama, his administration, has fundamentally changed the vision of America in the world, its role in the world, and the way the rest of the world sees it. Part of that was simply done by the election. I think the rest of the world was amazed that the American people elected someone like Barack Obama to be president. But the election wasn't enough, and a lot of it has been how he has reached out, how he has tried to develop relationships with the Muslim communities, how he's reached out to rising powers, how he's put great power relations back on track, how he's strengthened our alliances. And all of those things have put us in a much better place to exert American leadership than we were before. And thirdly, an area that I don't have any involvement in, the area of healthcare. I think he fundamentally took on one of the greatest challenges of addressing our healthcare challenges. Now, as Woody described my job, I believe that, frankly, I have probably the best job in government. I work for the National Economic Council, I work for the National Security Council. I'm the so-called Sherpa, which sounds sort of like kind of a funny name, but it means that I plan and help the president through the various international summits that he goes to. And my areas of responsibility are about the global economy, it's about energy security and climate change, and it's about development and democracy. And when I look back over the last couple of years, the things I'm most proud of that we've done in these areas are things like the creation and the institutionalization of something called the G20. It's a new group of countries that are working together to try and manage the global economy and the challenges that the global economy faces. And it's not just a meeting, it's not just a group. It reflects a belief that with the rise of China and India and Brazil, Indonesia, South Africa, it can't just be the rich countries of the world who dictate the terms of international relations anymore. You need to bring new powers to the table, and with that, they also have to take on new responsibilities. So it's a fundamental change in the way that international relations is done. Similarly, we're trying to take on new approaches to development, and I'm very proud that the President launched an international food security initiative, putting now $22 billion towards improving agricultural productivity in Africa, nutrition, making people more self-sufficient, and most of all, figuring out how we do development better. In a time when we don't have much money to spend abroad, it's important that every dollar we spend be productive, and we've done a lot to try and reform the way we do development so that every dollar goes further. And I'm very proud of what we did in Copenhagen. And I don't know how many of you follow climate change, or that's an issue of interest here on campus. But there was a situation where the president walked in to a meeting, frankly he barged into a meeting where 4 other countries were meeting, and he sat down with Secretary Clinton and negotiated a climate change agreement. And it was the most remarkable diplomatic event, I think. I've gone and talked to a bunch of historians. Nobody can quite remember a diplomatic event where there was no planning, there was no, it was very unclear what was going to come out of it, and it was just locking a series of leaders up in a room together until they could come up with an agreement to address what is a major challenge. Obviously, we have a lot of work to do on all these fronts, whether it's the economy, whether it's dealing with great powers, or whether it's dealing with the challenges to the planet around climate change. And, frankly, in my job, it's easy to get jaded. You're sitting around in the Oval Office, or you're flying around on Air Force One. It's easy to take these things for granted and not realize what a special opportunity and a special time it is in American history. I have a colleague down the hall from me named Cass Sunstein, one of the leading lawyers in the country. And one Friday night, we were walking out of the building together, and he turned to me and he said, "What have you done this week to make the country a better place?" And I thought, that's kind of an interesting question. And it's a question we should ask ourselves every week, because when we can't answer it well anymore, we should leave. And I think every week I ask myself that question, and I think it's something that's a good discipline. But sometimes when you're sitting around and having these heady discussions, you've got to pinch yourself and ask yourself, you know, why is this person from Marin County, you know, sitting there, I don't know, flying around Bosnia or trying to negotiate a peace agreement between the Serbs and the Croats? Or when my wife and I first went to Albania after law school, we were the first American lawyers in the country helping them draft a new constitution. You know, what the heck were we doing there? Or sitting in the Great Hall of the People in Beijing trying to negotiate a trade agreement with China, or with President Sarkozy of France trying to negotiate an agreement on tax havens. And every time I find myself in those situations, and I ask myself, you know, how did I get here? And I think it comes back to that issue of luck. You know, luck isn't the same thing as being random. You know, luck comes in two varieties. There's good luck and there's bad luck, and I think I've had a sort of a surplus of both in many respects. But luck is what you make of it, and 90% of it is what attitude you have towards the opportunities you're given. And that comes back to places like this, like Branson, that prepare you not just by teaching you how to write and how to organize yourself and how to present your thoughts, all of which are absolutely critically important to success, but prepare you by teaching you critical thinking, how to ask the hard questions, how to work through problems with your fellow colleagues. And that will set you off well for whatever your lucky journey might be. So thank you again for honoring me with this award, and I wish you the best on your journey. Good luck.
Does anyone have any questions for Michael?
Come on, don't be shy. There you go. See this gentleman. Yep.
What have you done this week
That's a good question. Well, I'd say I've been preoccupied for the last several weeks by the situation in the Middle East, starting in Egypt, but looking also elsewhere in the Middle East, and wrestling with the question of how do you deal, in the case of Egypt, for example, with a huge problem of youth unemployment, with an economic system that has not served that population sufficiently well. And how do you make sure that as Egypt goes through whatever transition it decides to go through, that the issues that are affecting people are being addressed appropriately? So we're looking at our assistance efforts, we're looking at what the international community can do, we're consulting with our colleagues in Europe and in the Gulf and elsewhere, all with the eye towards making sure that wherever this process ends up, that there's a dividend that pays for people, and that their lot is better in the end.
How have you, as an administration, dealt with the criticism of people saying, oh, you haven't fixed the economic crisis quick enough, when it really was the Bush administration who left all of this behind?
Well, thank you for that question. Rich Hall said is here from the IJ. I hope he's taking that down very carefully. No, look, I think we inherited a very difficult situation. I mean, it really was a remarkably precarious situation. We were losing 700,000 jobs a month. The economy was contracting at a rate of 6% a year. And frankly, we were dealing with issues that were issues of first impression. You know, there was no playbook to take off the shelf and say, this is the way to get it done. And I think it took a lot of bold leadership by the president and his economic team to do things that were incredibly unpopular. I mean, the bailout of the banks was incredibly unpopular. The bailout of the auto companies, also unpopular, but they were the right thing to do. And the banks are now back on their feet, and the auto companies are now profitable, and people are going back to work not nearly fast enough. And that is our next challenge, which is, you know, we've had about 10 months now of private sector job growth, which is good, but we still have probably 7 million people who lost their job in the crisis who want to go back to work. And it is thinking every day what can be done, whether it's helping small business, whether it's removing regulations, whether it's how we spend the remainder of the stimulus money to ensure that people ultimately will be able to get back to work, and that is really our challenge. And internationally, through the same thing, through the G20 that I mentioned, and through other mechanisms, ensuring that other countries do what they need to do so that we don't get back into the unsustainable imbalances that led to this crisis. But it is, it's going to take some time, and it is our #1 priority. This gentleman had a question.
How much of what, like, I understand if you cannot answer the question, but how much of what you work on, like, cannot be released to the public and not specifically, like, in one general area of what you work on?
Being part of the National Security Council as well as the National Economic Council, a fair amount of what I do is actually classified. On my desk I have 2 computer systems, one's classified and one's unclassified. A lot of what I do has to do with diplomacy and sensitivity with other countries, and notwithstanding WikiLeaks, we do try and keep those things classified. So a lot of what I do is that. But ultimately, because it's areas like the economy, development, climate change, energy, democratization, much of it sort of comes out over time, or you see the results over time. Scotty.
So obviously, you know, starting with Tunisia and then Egypt and now even Bahrain, there are waves of instability spreading throughout the Middle East. What role do you think the United States should play in ensuring that stability is maintained while we also, you know, advocate for democracy, which is a key American value?
Well, I think, you know, first and foremost, this is an issue that has to be resolved by the people in those countries. And nobody from the outside can dictate an outcome or steer it in any particular direction. And we've laid out a series of principles, including that one, including nonviolence, both by the government but also by the protesters, and further inclusion of points of view in this process. So we stand ready to be supportive, but it is supportive of what the people themselves in those countries want to see happen. And that, to me, ultimately is the most sustainable and stable outcome. Sir?
2 questions. First of all, what was it like coming from the private sector, and I think it was Citigroup and everything, then into government?
Most people ask me the other way around, which was when I was here in the 90s in government and went to the private sector, how did I manage that? But I think you know, Citigroup is a large institution. It's global. It's involved in emerging markets as well as developed markets. So it actually was a fairly natural transition to take what I had learned in terms of how the global economy works, how the financial system works, strengths and weaknesses to be addressed, and to bring those into government to try and address them. You know, ultimately, I find that the things that you take from one job to another are not so much the subject matter expertise, but it's the skills that you pick up in each place. The ability to take vast amounts of information and boil them down into something that's manageable. The ability to tee that up in a way to principles, the president ultimately, to make a decision. The ability to develop a consensus among your colleagues with different points of views about the way forward. The ability to be both strategic and tactical, to lay out a strategy, but then figure out the various steps of how to get there and to manage process towards that outcome. Those are skills that were important in the private sector. They are skills that are very important in the public sector. And so I find it quite, you know, our system is different. In England and in France, you don't have people coming in and out of government in the same way that you do here. You have very strong, very professional, highly educated civil services that serve whoever the prime minister or president may be at the time. And you have very much less many fewer political appointees coming in from one administration to the next. Each system has its strength. I find that the strength of our system is that the dynamism of bringing people into government who have had experiences outside of government, whether it's as in a human rights NGO or in the private sector or as a teacher, and bringing those into the government where they can bring that intellectual capital, apply it, and then bring their experience from government back to their respective sectors, I think creates a great strength to our system.
how do you and the Obama administration rectify the monetary support which the government has given to dictatorial government such as Tunisia with values?
I'm sorry, you have to speak up. or read your card more slowly.
How do you and the Obama administration rectify the support which the government has given to dictatorial governments such as Egypt with the American values of democracy?
That's a good question. So, obviously we have a long-standing relationship with the government of Egypt. And I would have to say, and having been fairly intimately involved in the last several weeks, we've given a lot of military aid to Egypt over the last 3 years, since the Camp David Accords. And the military ties between our military and the Egyptian military is very good. The Egyptian military has come to training in the U.S. Our officers have trained them. I think, frankly, that has been a force for good through this process in terms of having a dialogue about avoiding violence and managing this transition. So it is the question you raise is a good one. It's one that I think we wrestle with all the time. And I think the Egypt example it shows one of the strengths has been that we've developed a very strong relationship with the current government of Egypt, and that if you had asked people whether this sort of transition might have been possible in Egypt, which was not bloodless, but was really relatively peaceful, whether that would have been possible, I think people would not have thought it was until it happened. So it's one of the strengths of that relationship. It's on the edge.
How have issues of climate change been maintained as more prominent problems such as healthcare or the economy been dealt with at the same time?
Well, it's no secret that we've not passed comprehensive climate change legislation. The Obama administration was in favor of it, worked with Congress on it. Congressman Waxman, Congressman Markey passed a bill in the House in '09 that took a good step forward, but we've not completed that task. We are working, obviously, both with Congress, but also through our regulatory powers to address the issue of climate change, whether it's by raising the CAFE standards or taking forward a clean energy standard more generally in the economy. And internationally, we've been playing a leadership role in bringing the countries together to try and build an international regime for dealing with climate change. And that took a major step forward in Copenhagen with the President's personal involvement. And it took another step forward in Cancun in December, where the countries of all the UN took the Copenhagen Accord into the UN system and built upon it. So I think we're making progress. We're doing a lot to invest in clean energy as part of the stimulus package. There's $78 billion being spent on clean energy. And we're looking at a number of different ways of trying to transition our economy to more of a low-carbon economy. So we do what we can domestically. We also do what we can to show leadership internationally. Gentlemen?
What does the U.S. try to achieve by placing stricter sanctions on Iran?
What is the U.S. trying to achieve by putting sanctions on Iran? Well, clearly we believe that one of the greatest threats to international security right now is Iran's effort to acquire nuclear weapons. And working through the UN, but also with the EU and others, we want to create as much disincentive for them to pursue that path as possible. And I'd say this has been an area of great progress in that we've got through the UN, including China and Russia, to cooperate on a fairly robust set of sanctions to send the message to Iran that there is another path forward for them. And we stand ready to negotiate with them if they're willing to take that path.
We're getting the podium. Thank you very much, Michael.